Wonderful. Thanks, Ryan. So as Ryan said, I'm a semi-recent graduate of the geography program here, Masters of Arts. And I did my thesis on the representations and realities of agritourism in Essex County, Ontario. And I did also have some connections with CEDRED throughout that process. Ryan was on my committee, and then Wayne was my external examiner. So pleased to be invited back. It's been a while since I looked at this information, so I kind of had to blow the dust off of my thesis a little bit. So I'm not necessarily as familiar with the literature anymore, but I am still very familiar with the stories that came along with my research. So I think during this presentation, that's probably what I'm going to try and relay a little bit more than I did previously, because that's kind of what stuck with me the most in the years that have passed since. So first off, a very quick definition of what I'm calling agritourism. So agritourism is the act of visiting a working farm for the purposes of enjoyment, education, or active involvement in the activities on the farm or the operation. So we're thinking U-picks, corn mazes, petting zoos, goat yoga, and I've also included in my definition estate wineries, because that is in definition an agricultural operation. And down in Essex County, it's a very prominent agricultural operation in which people go on to the farm, if you will, the winery, to kind of partake in that activities and be in that atmosphere. So that's agritourism, kind of in a nutshell of how I am defining it. There we go. So as many master's theses start, I also did a literature review, kind of looking at the ways that agritourism are used. What are the different roles of agritourism? And there are four main ones that came up. Slight delay. The first being on-farm diversification. So in Ontario and Canada and most kind of developed agricultural economies more broadly, we've been seeing a restructuring of the agricultural sector. So kind of a move towards a very production-oriented focus. And that means things like operations are getting larger, they're getting more specialized, and they're becoming more mechanized. But some farmers are unwilling or unable to participate in that restructuring. So either they just can't afford the land, land's incredibly expensive, they can't afford the larger machinery, or it just doesn't really jive with how they anticipated or perceived conducting agriculture and being a farmer on their land. So in that case, diversification with agritourism being one opportunity is a way to kind of diversify your enterprise, so get different streams of income, but still remain in the farm sector, because something we've also been seeing is that the number of farms are actually declining, so a lot of people are departing from the sector. Agritourism and other diversification methods is one way of remaining within the sector. Double click. Come on. You can do it. There we go. Rural development would be the second role. This was touched on a lot less when it came to the agritourism literature. But basically what we're seeing is that in areas where agriculture has historically, and even contemporarily, been a main economic driver, we're seeing a decline in the economic and social prominence of agriculture within these communities. Simultaneously, we're seeing an increase in the interest and the appreciation of rural areas as a provider of recreation and more kind of consumption-oriented activities. So agritourism provides a really neat opportunity to kind of maintain the agricultural identity and character of an area, allow people to stay within the sector, but also meet that growing interest in recreation and consumption within the rural space. So the third role would be farm community linkages. And in this case, it's kind of that agritourism is a way to combat that declining social prominence of agriculture in these rural areas. So agritourism, in its role of inviting people onto the farm, is one way for farmers to reconnect with their community, but then also for the community to reconnect with the farm and agricultural a bit more broadly. And then finally, agritourism and agriculture more broadly can be used within regional branding. So branding is basically kind of creating a unique identity and narrative about place. And when it comes to tourism, that's often kind of centered around authenticity and uniqueness. So when agriculture features prominently within the identity and the history of an area, it makes sense that agritourism is a really good opportunity for tourists to come onto the farm, experience something that's considered authentic, but it's often in a very curated fashion. So kind of promoting often the rural ideal, but agritourism can feature prominently within branding. Prince Edward County being a really excellent example of kind of a place that has historical agricultural legacy and identity, but they've kind of pushed that into something that is more tourist friendly. So we see kind of the red barn and the grapes featuring in their logo, and it's in pretty much all of their promotional materials. And we see these four roles, even though there's a lot of interconnection between them, we see them playing out on two main levels. The first being the regional level, so, or the farm level. So the ways that, the pathways that they have diversified their farm, the way that they have diversified their farm is often intimately connected to the types of community linkages that are present. And then the second being at the regional level. So rural development and regional branding is intimately tied, especially when creating that authentic, quote unquote, authentic experience of place around tourism. And that's something that we're seeing a lot of rural areas turning towards in the past couple of decades, really. So to further explore these roles and the levels that they're playing out on, I conducted a research aim, created a research aim around understanding the role of agritourism more or less on the farm level. So how is it being used as a level of farm level diversification, but then also how is it featuring within the regional brand in Essex County, Ontario. And for those of you who are not familiar necessarily with Essex County, it is the southernmost county in Ontario. It has Lake Erie to the south. And then it's also right on the border with Windsor. Windsor's not technically part of Essex County, but they do share a lot of services, including tourism promotion. Agriculture continues to be a really, really prominent sector within Essex County, and though the majority of farms grow oil seeds, the cash receipts are just absolutely dominated by greenhouse production. Essex County, at the time I was doing this research, and I imagine it's probably still the same, was actually the most intensive greenhouse area in North America. I don't imagine that that's changed. In fact, you're seeing the number of greenhouses go up and up and up, a lot of which are with tomatoes, but increasingly cannabis and other hothouse vegetables as well. And I will note that Essex County has kind of seen multiple iterations of restructuring. So back in the very late 1800s, there were grapes that were being grown in Essex County that then transitioned into more proliferation of tobacco. Then that started overlapping with field tomatoes. Now that's kind of on the decline, and we're seeing a reintroduction of grapes, but also a massive proliferation of those greenhouses. So this is kind of a pathway that they've been experiencing over the past century, if not a little bit longer. And then finally, the Lake Erie North Shore. So Essex County is actually part of one of three designated wine regions within Ontario, with Niagara and Prince Edward County being probably the two more familiar wine regions that people are familiar with. But there's been a really, really active role by the county and Windsor in promoting the recreational activities that are available within their rural areas. So they have the Festival of Birds, they're really promoting their water sports. So this kind of restructuring and focusing on the prominence of kind of consumption-oriented activities and tourism within the county is very much so occurring within Essex County, even though agriculture continues to be a major economic player. Okay, so for my methods, just very quickly, they kind of played out again on two main levels. The first being the regional level. I did a discourse analysis of pretty much any promotional materials that featured agritourism throughout 2016. And then I did an interview with their destination marketing organization. They're called Tourism Windsor Essex Peely Island. I call them TWEPI. They really don't like it for obvious reasons, but we're gonna go with TWEPI all the same because the other one's a mouthful. The second level being the farm and winery level. So I went out and did some interviews with agritourism providers. So I did interviews with 8 farms and then 6 wineries. There's actually 17 or 18 wineries down in Essex County, but I focus primarily on the ones that are very small. So not the Peely Island, not the Colio, because they're absolutely massive. I've really focused on the ones that were really reliant on tourism and were not necessarily able to draw in masses on their own. Like, people will go to Essex County just to visit Peely Island. These wineries kind of need more of that collaboration, that more of the province or the county-wide network to be able to draw people in. Okay, so we'll start with the county level. And kind of the key question here was, how was agritourism being used in promotional materials? How does agritourism feature within the regional brand? And what I found is very similar to what I would have expected coming out of the literature. There was a really distinctive odd between what I called outward marketing and inward marketing. So outward marketing is primarily your tourism promotion. So that's really targeting people that are less familiar with the county. So that could be people from Detroit, that could be people from London, or honestly, that could be people from Windsor, that could be people from Leamington going over to Harrow, right? So outward can be very broadly defined, but generally that's your tourism marketing. And then we had the inward marketing. So this is really focused on people who are more familiar with the county, who perhaps live in the county, and this would include your buy local campaigns. And kind of throughout this discourse analysis, I explored 3 major themes, which I'll get into in the next slides. But with the tourism promotion, the narrative that was being crafted around agritourism and food and wineries was that Essex County is an escape. It is your rural getaway, which is not entirely surprising. That's often how rural areas are being portrayed, but nonetheless, kind of escape into like the simple pleasures of Essex County and have a very experiential kind of destination. When it came to the inward marketing of those buy local campaigns, the main narrative that was being crafted around that was the superiority of local products. Local products are the best products. Essex County fruits and vegetables are the ones you want, but also that agriculture is a very integral part of community identity and regional identity. Okay, so product. This is the first theme that I picked up on. So looking at the tourism materials, they talked a lot about variety and the acclaim of their wine. So when it came to talking about the wineries, it was all about kind of boosting themselves as a destination and really promoting their kind of wine region, because they recognize that they're probably the lesser known of the 3. So they're really just trying to like get the word out there and say like, we're great wine. We have great wine, just like Niagara has great wine. We have internationally acclaimed wine. So you should also consider Lake Erie North Shore as a destination. Woo! I think something got stuck. And that's it. We're done. Keep going. Yep, there. Okay, we'll try this again. Whew. Okay, so tourism. When it came to talking about agritourism, quite frankly, they didn't. They didn't really talk about agritourism. There was a couple of ads for tourism, agritourism destinations, but their focus was primarily on food and the provision of food and agriculture as that. So they're talking about bounty and naturalness. They're really kind of playing into consumer trends when it comes to that language. I don't know what it means when they say we naturally produce dairy. Like what, like cows naturally produce dairy? That's yes, but like that's the language that's being used in pretty much all advertising these days. So they're really tapping into that desire from the consumers as well. And then bounty was a really, really big thing. I think at one point they used the term cornucopia as like a descriptor. Like that shows commitment. If you're willing to use the word cornucopia, then that shows you are committed to expressing how bountiful that harvest is. But things change when you look at the inward marketing, those buy local campaigns, because they're really talking about the superiority of the products, knowing that they want to like market the products themselves to the people who are going to go buy them. So they're talking about how local produce promotes a cleaner environment. So they're also tapping into consumer concerns, but in a very, very different way that that kind of promotes the materiality of the product that they are trying to sell. Whereas the tourism folks are really just trying to like promote this ideal, this aesthetic, if you will. So place, this is kind of another major theme. And if we look at tourism and the wineries, they're all about kind of the experiential nature of wine. So they're heavy on the verbiage, breathe in, taste. At the time, their wine map was kind of like a treasure map, which is really cool. But again, really promoting that experiential nature of being in the region. When they move to kind of promoting agriculture and other rural areas, it's again about meeting that kind of ideal. So it's very lush, it's productive, again, bounty, cornucopia, if you will. And then also kind of wood and handmade signs. So in this sense, agriculture is a backdrop, right? So they're, again, promoting that idyllic nature of the county and what you almost are expecting to see as you're driving past on your way to a winery to experience and breathe in the winery, whatever that means. When we look at the buy local campaigns, totally different. They are absolutely promoting the rural area as a lived place. Local farmers are families in your community. That's what they want to kind of express. They're businesses. You're supporting local businesses. You're supporting local families because Essex County is a lived place. It's not just a place that you're driving past. It's a place where you exist. By all means, anyone who wants chocolate, come up. So the final theme would be the farmer. And when it came to the tourism promotions, the farmer's not really present at all. They mentioned that our fields produce. Like, yes, your fields do produce, but someone's out there working in the fields to get them to produce that. But they never really mentioned that. And then in a lot of their promotional materials back in 2016, they featured like headless farmers. This isn't an awkward crop on my behalf. Like this is something that they put out there of just like the awkward crotch shot as well as some vegetables. So it's very like an empty place. Again, it's a backdrop. That doesn't really change when you move to the winery because then it's really focused on the experiential nature. Once again, the fresh harvest is yours for the picking. You can go out and haul that carrot. You cannot go out and haul that carrot, but they would love for you to believe that, right? And I love the image of her holding the grapes. Like if the winemaker saw that, they would have a conniption if they saw someone holding the grapes. But that's very much so what they're trying to promote of you know, strolling through the rows of grapes. And you can just, you know, nibble here and there if you so choose, which is absolutely not the case. By local campaigns, farmers were at the forefront because again, we're drawing on farmers being part of the community. Farmers are families. He has his little girl up there. You got to throw either a dog or a child in and it's gold. And then farmers are experts, right? Farmers are stewards of the land. They understand more than most because, you know, they're on the land. They are the experts. They can provide that quality, safe produce that they're really trying to ingrain into their regional identity when it comes to agriculture. Okay, so that's some of the differences that I saw through those themes, looking at the discourse analysis of those promotional materials. And again, this is a rapidly evolving field. Things have changed a bit since 2016, but I went online last night and took a look, and things haven't changed that much. Sure, the farmers have faces now, but the fields are still producing things. So they've come a long way, but there's still kind of a weird disconnect when it comes to their promotions. Okay, so moving down to the farm and winery level. Here I was really interested in what is the role of agritourism on the farm and winery. And I broke it up into those two kind of distinct farm winery, despite both being agritourism, because that's really what was reflected in my results. They were kind of two diverging pathways. So the first being looking at the private role. So what does agritourism mean to the farmer? How are they using it on their farm? And I found that it was very much so a diversification activity, which is exactly what I would have expected from the literature. And one of the most prominent motivations would be financial in nature. And a lot of this boiled down to kind of a disillusionment with kind of those traditional kind of selling practices. So either it was commodity prices were super unstable and we were not getting reliable income, and that really stressed us out. Or it was, you know, we grow apples, but one year hail came through, marked up all the apples, and there goes basically the entirety of our crop. So what do we do? So it's kind of a disillusionment with the traditional conventional wholesaling way of doing business. There were also a lot of lifestyle motivations, and this is also something that's reflected in the literature, but a little bit less so. And a lot of those boiled down to connections with their family, because let's not forget, on the farm, it's not just a business, it's also your household. It has a dual role. So it's not surprising that those two things are interconnected. But importantly, not a single farmer said only financial or only lifestyle. They absolutely had very unique pathways with overlapping motivations. They're in it for both of these reasons. And as a result, they were highly diverse and they had very differing goals. So I'll kind of give you two examples with the financial motivation and one with a lifestyle motivation as the more prominent. So the first one, they're pick your own apples, but they have a bunch of other different activities that you can do on the farm. And he kind of got into it for the exact reason I mentioned earlier. Hail came through, marked up all of his apples. He said, I can't sell these. No one's going to buy them. So he shoved a few in a bag, stuck them on the side of the road. And then he was like, holy crap, someone actually purchased these. So that's kind of when it got started. It was a slow proliferation, but then he was like, next year, okay, let's put a couple more bags of apples out. And people are purchasing them more than I would have ever gotten from wholesaling them. And then the next year he said, well, why don't I just let them come in and pick the apples themselves, because that saves me some labor. And people were really into that. So it was kind of a step by step by step. And then one year his little girl wanted a pony, so they got a pony, and then all of a sudden they're doing like pony rides. And then his eldest daughter was really interested in baking and getting into the culinary side. So now all of a sudden they're doing, they have a bakery, they're getting into the culinary side of things. They're doing jams and jellies. So again, it's the familial connection, but also the financial motivation, bringing those two together. He also said one of the major factors was that he was new to the area and he basically just couldn't afford more land. No one was going to sell it to him because he didn't have a last name that resonated with them, or he wasn't connected to the right people, and he just couldn't afford it. So he had to find a way to diversify his enterprise and start stacking some things on top of one another. Someone with more of a lifestyle motivation would be, there's a group down there, they do pick your own, well, like pick your own pumpkins. They don't let people out in the fields, but they like to think that they're picking their own. And they got into it because they were recently retired from their off-farm jobs. They've been doing corn, soy, wheat for basically forever, but also had off-farm jobs to supplement their income. And they were kind of bored. And they started growing pumpkins for their grandkids, and that went really successful. And then their kids were like, you guys should sell these. So it was really the kids like pushing them into being an agritourism operator. Now they've been operating for about a decade. I think they're absolutely massive. But the way that they do business is very different from the way that the people who were primarily financially motivated do business, because they have very unique pathways and very different motivations. Okay, so moving to public roles, of course, agritourism isn't just about what it means to the farmers, it's about what it means to the community as well. And the three main kind of services that farmers thought that they provided was education. So they really focused on being able to talk to people who came onto the farm, dispel some of those myths, get into the nitty gritty of what is a GMO. No, our pumpkins aren't GMO. Yes, our corn probably is. So kind of have those conversations and be that expert. They also provide safe and local food. This is a big one for them. And they thought that being able to have that conversation with consumers helped to kind of build a trusting relationship in which they were then able to provide reliably safe and local food. And safe was a big one for them. Kind of being able to show that, like, it came from our backyard, it's now into your hands, and I can talk you through every single step of that process. Finally, agritourism also provides that rural experience and connection. So they talked a lot about how people, young and old, just wanted to get out of the city, breathe some fresh air, and maybe participate in some kind of on-farm experience. I had one farmer talking to me about how an older lady comes in with her grandkids, and the older lady said, I remember when I was a kid and I went out picking strawberries, and I did it with my kids. I brought them here picking strawberries, and now I'm doing it with my grandkids. And that's really, really important to me, having that connection and sharing that experience was absolutely critical to how they participate in agritourism and why they come onto the farm. And then finally, I looked at networks, because the literature would kind of suggest that networks are really integral to the success of these operations. But I found that actually most agritourism operations, actually none of them integrated with one another. There was no kind of horizontal networks amongst agritourism providers. In fact, they didn't really know what else was out there. There also wasn't very much in the way of a relationship between them and the tourism people. This is an example of a positive relationship with Tourism Windsor, Essex, Pelee Island. They identified themselves as agritourism. We're attracting people to the farm. Sure, this is great. They had a really good working relationship with TWEPI. But then most of people had this thought, tourists, we don't really want them. They didn't really kind of perceive themselves as tourism providers because they were very county focused. They really attracted primarily locals. But they also kind of recognized that they were family focused, that they had a short season, and they thought that this was probably misaligned with what they perceived to be a very winery and wine focused perspective from the tourism people. So they felt no need to have a relationship with the tourism folks. Now, of course, a lot of this changes when I go to the winery side. Again, getting back to those private roles, why did people get into winery ownership? For them, it was a lot about lifestyle. Of course, financial played in heavily as well. It's a big investment. But for them, it was about, I retired, I wanted to change career, third active life. But primarily, I love wine, and I had this opportunity, so I decided to do it. Really, they're early adopters, right? Like they're kind of new to this industry. There's not like 50 wineries in Windsor, Essex, Pelee Island. So it's really a labor of love for them. So very lifestyle motivated. And that is also reflected when it comes to the public roles of the winery, because they were, again, they didn't even like count themselves as part of that role. It was all about the wine. It was all about winery sales, winery visitation, a successful wine region. So they were very, very singular and focused about having a successful wine region, selling wine, remaining financially viable, but again, kind of being able to live in that lifestyle. So they have very similar goals as well. And I will note that, most of these wineries, the people who work there and own them actually worked on the winery. They're not just kind of some upper level kind of faceless entity when it comes to these wineries, especially because I was talking to the smaller wineries. They were actually out there hauling weeds, talking with their wine grower every single day, planting the vines. They were very integrated into the operations both physical and kind of economical in nature of that winery. So when it comes to networks, everything changes when you go to the wineries because they had a really, really good horizontal networks. They knew who all of the winery owners were. They knew who all of the potential wineries over. If they heard that someone was even saying winery, I swear to goodness that they know who they were. And they started really, really cooperative because again, they knew that there was kind of this critical need for collective success. One winery isn't successful necessarily, but they know that 15, 20, 25 wineries, that creates a destination. And that's how they're going to remain commercially viable and kind of reach their motivations and goals as a winery. So that made them much more of a community. They're not best friends. They recognize that they're in competition with one another, but they also know that collective success to them was imperative to individual success as well. They also had this, it's called Essex Island Coast. It's kind of their formal horizontal network. You have to buy to get, to be part of EPIC, but this helped them create this united collective front. They're very organized, and that means that they could form an excellent relationship with Tourism Windsor Essex Island. So they are like natural bedfellows. They are working together every single step of the way. TWEPI provides a lot of their promotional materials, and they're super, super organized. So they recognize that this is really important to the success of their wineries, is having and maintaining this collective unified front and having a fantastic relationship with Tourism Windsor Essex Island. So unlike the farm side of things, the wineries kind of recognize the need for networking to be successful in their region. Coffee. Okay, so start bringing those two kind of sides together. The representation, so the branding versus the reality is what is it like on the farm and winery. And we saw that when it comes to the buy local campaigns, that inward marketing, if you will, and the agritourism farms, there was a lot of give and take. The buy local campaigns were pretty accurate when they were kind of advertising these agritourism farms. They really focused on the role of the farmer as an expert, as a provider of quality food, as someone who is there on the farm to chat with you about what they do. And that's absolutely what the agritourism providers felt themselves. They saw themselves as the expert. They saw themselves as that community liaison. And as a result, the way branding basically works is the more real the product is in the way that you're kind of advertising it, the more that starts giving a bit of a positive feedback loop. So you are kind of advertising something that is quote unquote authentic, but then on the kind of provider side, they feel that you were providing an authentic description, and then the people who go to those farms kind of experience that as well. So it's like a true, if you will, marketing, something that better reflects reality. And that kind of helps build things up, and as a result, kind of start achieving their goals of really ingraining quality and kind of the agricultural heritage of Essex County as part of their regional brand and regional identity. Kind of sticks their boots in a little bit more. We saw the same kind of relationship between outward marketing and the estate wineries. So the tourism promotion was pretty accurate in how they were promoting the wineries. It was all about the wine. That's exactly how the wineries saw themselves, the roles that they saw themselves providing. So again, that's kind of creating that positive feedback loop of kind of projecting something that is more or less true that then tourists are experiencing when they're going on to that winery. But that also means that they're able to work together a lot better and create those connections between tourism destinations and are like able to step forward together as almost a partnership. However, when it came to agritourism firms and the tourism promotion, there was a bit of overlap. They both saw each other, saw themselves as providers of localness, of local food, even the rural kind of experience. But the outward marketing did not showcase the farmer, and that was absolutely integral to how agritourism farms saw their role. the prominence of the farmer is absolutely imperative. So in that case, there was kind of a disconnect. The agritourism farms were able to provide the landscape that they were promoting, but they weren't really getting anything in return. No one's going to come to an agritourism farm kind of based on what they were promoting in terms of it's just a backdrop, because to them, it's not just a backdrop. It's a destination, it's a place to connect. So I kind of thought about, why is that the case? What are the implications of that disconnect? And for me, it kind of, again, goes back to collaboration and network. And the root of that, to me, in my perception, is similarity versus diversity. So if we look at the farm side and the tourism, the farms were very, very diverse. They had different goals, they had different pathways, and as a result, there was no real network between them. They didn't see the benefit of partnering with someone that maybe does strawberries in the spring and then they do apples in the fall. It just didn't make sense to them. And then as a result, there's no real vertical network because they're not providing a united front. Again, they didn't really know who else was out there. So it's kind of hard to provide kind of a organized united front and advocate for yourself to the tourism people if you don't have that kind of coalescing of goals and motivations. So again, they didn't really have a relationship with the tourism people, and therefore they're not well represented within the brand that the tourism people were putting out there. They had a really weak representation, and I feel, and my perception is that is because they're not able to provide that united front. Unlike the wineries, again, they have basically the exact same goal, every single one of them, the similar motivations. They have a very strong horizontal network. As a result, they had an excellent relationship with TWEPI and really, really strong representation because they are at the table when they are creating those materials and kind of defining the way that wine is going to feature within the regional brand when it comes to tourism. Things change a little bit when you look at the inward marketing, those buy local campaigns. And although the farms still don't really have a horizontal networks when it comes to agritourism, they absolutely do have a horizontal network when it comes to the Essex County Federation of Agriculture, which is the people that put out the Buy Local campaign. So basically, farmers are at the table when they're creating that brand and that campaign, and therefore they're going to be represented way more realistically, if you will. So moving on to some conclusions. I have no idea, how long have I taken so far? I'm still, okay, excellent. Again, this is a snapshot of a rapidly evolving sector. Since 2016, things have changed. Things will continue to change. They've won awards for their various marketing campaigns through the tourism. Like, they're very, very highly regarded when it comes to how they are promoting tourism and developing tourism as an economic driver in Essex County. But I did note that agricultural diversification and rural tourism, even though there's kind of the same drivers between them, they don't always intersect. In fact, down here, they seem to be very much so like a parallel process rather than something that intersects more frequently. And I think some of the factors that are impacting that overlap would be the degree of similarity amongst enterprises. So the farms were very dissimilar. Therefore, they didn't really create those horizontal or vertical networks, whereas the wineries were very similar, and therefore it was a lot easier to create those horizontal and vertical networks. Common goals between enterprises and brand managers. So the winery people, they really wanted to create a full destination, a regional destination, whereas the farmers were much more isolated in nature. They wanted the people to come to their farm. They didn't really care necessarily about the rest of the region and how they are thriving as an agritourism destination. And then, of course, presence of other competing regional assets. I think this is a really big one. Like, when the tourism people are creating their brand, they have like the Epic as just this like ready to go product. They've put in the work. They know that they have to look nice and they have to have all of these connections to make it a really saleable product. And they've put in that work already. So they have a really good regional asset, and therefore there's a little bit less incentive to build up a regional asset within the agritourism kind of on the farm side. And then, of course, agritourism can contribute to rural development in different ways. Even though as I've focused more so on tourism, the inward marketing campaign is actually pretty successful. They're kind of communicating more realistically, and they are, in my mind, forging more of a strong connection and identity in Essex County as related to agriculture. And again, this is something that has gone up and down for the past century, but they're really trying to keep the agricultural nature and legacy and heritage in Essex County alive, and that's kind of proliferated through those agritourism destinations, which is really the primary way that people can get out onto the farm in Essex County. So in that case, rural development is very, very successful when it comes to those inward campaigns and promoting things within the county itself. And then, of course, there's lots of other connections that are happening as well. The pumpkin farm that I was talking about, they have all sorts of amazing connections within the community, kind of bringing in community groups left, right, and center to be at the farm, to have a booth featuring them on their promotional materials through Facebook. So that is creating their own horizontal network, not necessarily with agritourism, but with the community much more broadly. So you can see those bonds are tightening again through those relationships that are being built. So it doesn't have to be tourism. That's one that I mostly focused on. But rural development is happening in a lot of different ways as kind of perpetuated and facilitated through agritourism. So with that, I will take questions and or comments. Oh my God, really? I went that long? I am so sorry. Thank you.
In terms of, you mentioned Philly Island and the great asset that is for tourism as well, right? So do you think there is a connection in terms of how, as the season goes up and down, in terms of going and looking at the migratory birds, do people actually come in waves to that area for the
Yeah, I think so. And that, I think my impression from my discussion with TWEPI is that that is highly engineered. And that's also, I'm discussing it with wineries. They said things kind of peak around Christmas a little bit, like there's like a little spike around Christmas. And then everything's downhill until the Bird Festival, which was basically brought in by TWEPI. And that has been like pushed along as much as they can, because they said basically the county wasn't ready for a bird festival, but we're going to make it ready. And then that kind of kicks off the tourism season. So yeah, you're kind of getting the ebb and flow that's on the early side, and then kind of goes down a little bit. And then basically throughout the entire summer, it's very busy again. And then there's a bunch of tourism farms that are really prominent throughout kind of September and October. So that gets a bit of a peak. But yeah, very much so kind of a waves, but I think they're working really hard to create more of an even keel, at least through the nicer months, because they recognize that's really challenging on everyone to have that kind of ebb and flow. They want something that's a little bit more consistent. So they're just trying to create products basically that creates that more even keeled distribution. Give her.
I'm intrigued by the picture on any liability concerns come up for any farmers or damage to the trees, the apples and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, very much so. So I think there was 3 or 4 that I spoke with, 2 of which were really large, and were the apple pickers. And they had all of the proper insurance and all of that stuff. But I talked to one, and he said, basically that after they went into it a little bit naively, thinking that people would like pick them properly and like actually put the ones that they pick into their basket. And he said they just don't. They're like, nope, too green, throw that away. Nope, don't like that one, throw that away. And he said like it drives them nuts. So he had to jack the prices up to basically account for wastage when it comes to that. And then yeah, I think they maintain basically every single day trying to reduce the damage to the trees. Yeah, so they basically said like before, we were price takers when it came to the wholesaling. Now we're price makers, and we have to recognize that we're providing a product that people really want. And even if it's more expensive than going to get a bag of apples in the grocery store, like, it is what it is. You're just throwing them on the ground. I think one of them were saying, like, they've come into their public washroom, and there was like toilets and like apples in the toilet, like people. Yeah, so they jack up the price. It's a huge concern, and I think it's just like a matter of increasing the prices and having people out there to make sure that people aren't like hauling down bits and pieces of the tree.
But it's still worthwhile if they maintain their operation.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And they're like cycling every single year. They're cycling out trees and planting new ones because the life cycle of an apple tree is not all that long. But yeah, they still thought it was very much so worthwhile. Yeah.
So we see a lot of like agritourism opportunities to pick their own situations. Are there opportunities in other production systems?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's probably an opportunity in all production systems, maybe not corn, soy, wheat, but basically everything else. Yeah, because agritourism can be everything from a pick your own, but also, you know, a cafe on site that creates food from local products or products that are grown on farm. I went to a conference, I think last year up in Simcoe, and they were talking about, my favorite is like when farmers get into a room and they talk about agritourism, what all the stupid things that people will pay for. And they were like, oh yeah, like I heard about this one where people were like literally paying to come and like muck out stalls and like, you know, like do hard agricultural labor. And they're like, people pay for this? But like, people pay for this. Yeah, like absolutely. Maybe not everywhere, right? Like I can't imagine many people down in Essex County are going to be paying to do the hard agricultural labor, but like, the closer you are to an urban market, the more the people are going to be interested in something that they deem to be authentic. Yeah. Yep.
I was just wondering, when you if you found any data, if there's a database that looks at with statistics on how many people actually come from other than experience some wine tasting. I'm actually from the concept.
Oh.
I've always been curious to know how many we actually get from other ways.
So that data is available as just like general tourism statistics through the Ministry of Tourism, I think. They put out data sets like every 5 or 6 years, I think. I suspect Twepi might have better data sets and more recent data sets. They wouldn't let me have them. But yes, winery specific, I really don't know. I strongly suspect it's not where they would like it to be. Yeah, because they were kind of saying that like we were expecting the number of wineries to like keep going up, follow like a Niagara or a Prince Edward County trajectory, but they've kind of stalled out at about 17, 18 for the past several years, and they're not kind of going beyond that as much as they were expecting. And that would suggest that either land's getting way too expensive, people are unwilling to invest, or it's starting to look like a bit of a rockier investment. Yes.
I know you didn't really mention it, but did you look at any animal agritourism, and were there any biosecurity concerns, and what did they do with that?
So I didn't, because there's none down there. Yeah, down in Essex County, there's like they have a kind of like a heritage property that people dress up in costume. They have a couple of sheep, but you're not allowed to go like pet the sheep or anything. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to speak to that, unfortunately. I wish they did. I was really looking forward to some goat yoga. Didn't happen. Unfortunately, but yeah, it's definitely biosecurity in general. Like even on the farms, it was something that they were interested and aware of, less so when it comes to crops, but it was still kind of like a slight liability. Yes.
Just more of a question, almost a comment, I guess, or maybe just to for this. You know how plant technology is actually going into high efficiency for crops like apples, and apples was one of your examples.
Yep.
Now, apple trees don't look like traditional apple trees
That's right.
anymore, right?
Yeah.
So when people are picking,
yeah.
So I wonder how that relates to that idle idea of people buying that.
That's right.
Farms, but they don't look like they used to be, or maybe the idea of having, you know, the canopy.
Yeah.
You know,
It's like apple columns now.
Kind of,
Yeah.
you're right, apple columns.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of some of the farms I went on, they weren't in production. Thankfully, I managed to like squeeze between like strawberry season and apple season somehow. I like hit the sweet spot. So they weren't in production when I was there, but they're not planting as densely. They're still planting pretty densely, but they're not like just like the bare stem with like apples. Like they're not quite the apple column that you would expect per se. So they still have like a bit of a canopy, but I don't know how much that kind of affects consumer experience. They almost don't want it like too easy, but again, it's really nice to have low ones so the youngins can pick an apple or things like that. So I think just seeing apples on a tree is really exciting for some people, especially people who are like less familiar with it. But there was one farm that I went on to, and they actually do, they're primarily stone fruit and apple growers, but they do like this big dinner in the orchard. They do it every single fall. It sells out. They get a local chef to create all these different creations using local produce and their produce. And they're like super, super efficient growers. Like they're like reducing the spacing down to like the bare minimum. They're absolutely on the forefront when it comes to creating efficient design. And it sounds like people are just really, like the people who come to their dinner are really interested in the science behind it and why are you doing it this way, and just wanting to learn more of that. That would be like an older demographic, less families, but I think there's kind of like a niche for everyone almost.
And one last question or comments, if anybody has one that they really want to get into.
I just wondered about the economic rentability of agritourism on the community. Do they have noted data as to before and after, or does the speed of improving or definitely trying to decline?
That's right. So there isn't down there. And honestly, there isn't much in the literature. I did find one down in New Jersey, and I think there's one in Michigan, a couple of studies. And it's really back and forth. Like, does it have an economic impact? Especially farm agritourism. Wineries, I think, tend to have a bit more of an upward flow. But again, I haven't really focused on that literature as much. It was more so on the farm agritourism. And it's really conflicting results, whether or not it actually has any kind of economic impact on the community. The farms that I went to, they did hire people from the community. But again, it's like low wage labor that's very seasonal in nature. So they're not actually giving back all that much. So yeah, that seems to be reflected in what I saw in the literature, but it's a lot of, no one's really come out with like a yes or no on this, but it seems like it maybe not a significant impact when it comes to agritourism in North America.
Sorry, would you put it into like more as a psychotherapy, like a therapy? Practicing, like rather than going to depression or looking through your own days, but it's money, kind of kill time and have fun?
So it's a little bit of both. So when it comes to the farmers and the economic benefit to the farmers, it seems that yes, there is some economic benefit to them, and the fact that they get to keep farming. But a lot of the studies say that the majority of kind of the value that they get out of being an agritourism farm is much more so in the conversations and the connections that they have with the community. So getting to have those tricky conversations around GMOs and how we grow what we grow, and like dispelling what they perceive to be like a lot of those myths that are being perpetuated in common discourse or social media. So a lot of the value that and literature kind of reflects this as well, a lot of the value that they're getting is not necessarily economic, though that is certainly benefiting them as an enterprise. They remain viable. The ones that are down in Essex County are actually quite successful. But it's more so about the community connection and being able to meet their neighbors, meet people from Windsor, and have those conversations. And like, you know, there was one farmer who they do the pumpkins, and they were talking about like how a little girl, they had this like massive pumpkin, right? This was like they loved this pumpkin. It was huge. And he said a little girl came and like wrote her name on it, like carved her name into the pumpkin. They didn't see it happen, but they thought it was the funniest thing ever. So it's just like the connection, and like getting to see people have that relationship with agriculture again, I think is something they say. And again, a lot of people I was chatting with are kind of like older in their age. There was only really 2 firms that had really young farmers on them. So that might be more reflective of kind of their place in life